Hi, my name's Father Evan Armatas, and I want to welcome you to this presentation of the Saint Nektarios Education Fund, a fund that began in 2002 between me and two friends. This first slide that's up tonight tells you a little bit about the fund by taking a photograph in a location where we went to a few years ago, Butembe, Uganda. We visited a classroom and met this classroom teacher who was instructing over 200 students in a dilapidated one-room classroom. Whenever I get a chance to talk about the Saint Nektarios Education Fund, I get a bit nervous. I get nervous because our work and what we do is so important, and I hope that in some way I can convey its importance to you, and I want to make sure that I get the message right. Before I tell you about the fund, I want to tell you a little bit about how things got started. I went off to seminary in 2000 and I studied at a place called Holy Cross in Brookline, Massachusetts. When I got there, I soon met a young man by the name of Amos Masaba Akunda. He was from Kenya, and he'd grown up in a grass hut village there in the middle of the bush, and he was celibate. He came to the seminary as an ordained clergyman, but he was also there as a student to study here in America. Now, one of the unusual things about my classmate was that his father was a school teacher in the village, which meant he had an opportunity to receive an education. Having received his education, he eventually made his way to America, where I met him. You know, we lived in the dormitories and he lived in a separate wing, and I used to go visit him in his room. And he had a small room. All seminary dorm rooms are fairly small. You could kind of reach out and touch the sides of your walls. Well, underneath his bed, he used to keep soda. And we used to drink soda, and I think one of the reasons he loves soda so much is that in Africa, clean water is hard to obtain. And you always know that if you drink a soda, you're not going to get sick. Well, he used to love to drink Mountain Dew. So one day we're sitting there having a Mountain Dew, and I noticed as he pulled the bottle from out underneath his bed, where he used to store it, there was a box of letters, hundreds of letters. And I asked him about the letters. I said to my friend, you know, Amos, what are these letters about? And he wouldn't tell me, and I kept pushing, tell me about these letters. Why do you have all these letters? And he said, well, these letters are from students back in my village. They know that I'm in America, and they would like for me to find a way to send them to school. So I asked him, well, how much is it to send one of these kids to school? And he said, well, these letters from these students, boy, the annual tuition would be about $50 per year. So we started looking at these letters. There was literally hundreds of them. And I said to him, well, why don't you pick a few out and let's see if we can't find donors. When we first looked at those letters, it was pretty impossible to pick just 8 students. There were literally hundreds of students who were looking for help. But we picked 8. And being seminarians, not much money in our pockets, about to graduate, what we could do was basically send those 8 students that $50 to get them going. Now, immediately after sending that money to those really needy students, my dear friend Amos Masaba Akunda was sent off to South Africa, and I was sent to Denver, Colorado to serve in my first parish. You know, so when I arrived at my new parish, the return envelope for those checks had my address, and those 8 students told their friends, and soon those letters started coming to me, and I had my own box of letters from Africa. Students looking for help. And I didn't know what to do. It really led to something unexpected. I really thought that in sending those first few checks, it was just making a gesture to help my friend and to help those students. And I really hadn't thought things through. And so that unexpected thing was that these students now were looking to me instead of my friend Amos to make sure that they could continue their education. In fact, I remember receiving some of those first few letters, and they got really difficult for me to read. They started to address me as their father, not because I'm a priest, but because they didn't have a parent that could take care of them. It's a rather unnerving thing to get a letter from someone you don't know who's now calling you their dad. But nevertheless, these letters kept coming, and I knew we had to do something. And so that really began this process of forming the Saint Nektarios Education Fund. And beginning in 2003, we started supporting students on an annual basis, making sure that they could receive a life-changing education. In time, the fund began to host over 450 students on an annual basis. You know, providing a life-changing education through providing individual scholarships to students is certainly a worthy cause, and in time the Saint Nektarios Education Fund not only provided these scholarships, but we branched out. We began to offer microgrants to small schools and institutions overseas. But in 2007, things changed for us. We began to notice that the administrative burden of taking care of each individual student was a bit much for us, especially overseas. And so we set out on our most ambitious project yet. We decided to construct our own standalone school in Sarum, Kenya. In 2007, we began this project. We entitled the project the Saint Nektarios Academy, and today that school is still operating and provides over 240 classroom seats for students in that remote area of Kenya. Since then, the Saint Nektarios Education Fund has added 4 additional schools to its entire portfolio. I'm going to tell you a little about those schools and some of our values in just a moment. We have a very simple vision. The Saint Nektarios Education Fund seeks to transform the lives of African children through education. It's a simple goal, but it's hard to accomplish. We came to this vision by way of our own experiences. My dear friend Amos, he received an education. It led to him studying in America and eventually receiving his PhD. Myself, my grandparents were immigrants from Greece who had never received education. They couldn't read or write their own language, let alone English, when they arrived on the shores of America. And yet their grandson had received not only a great education here in America that was free, part of our public education system, but went on to study in some of the best universities of our country. And so we realized that a life can be changed through an education. And education is something that never goes away. It's something that a student can take with them wherever they go. More than anything else, an education changes their lives. And so that's our sole focus. We're committed to that, and we know that by providing these resources for students, we truly change their lives. As I mentioned to you, our vision is rather simple, but I'd like to tell you about our values. It's how we operate the fund. We've got 4 of them, and the first of them is near and dear to our hearts. We've committed ourselves to building schools in the poorest, most remote areas of Africa. The first time that I went to Africa, we traveled out to Gulu, Uganda, where one of our schools had been constructed. With me was the Minister of Parliament that oversaw that region. When we arrived in the location that the school was constructed, he turned to me and said, "How did you do this?" He said, "Even in the national government, we couldn't have constructed this school in such a remote region." It's important to us that we reach those students who are least served by their own governments. One of the things that we also do in providing these schools in remote areas is we lift up not only those students, but an entire community. We create drivers for the economy. We bring in things like clean water and power. These are things that these communities have never had. In fact, I remember when we got to Butembe, another school that we constructed in one of the most remote areas. It's by the shores of Lake Victoria. They have tons of fresh water, but the water's contaminated. Well, we built a rain harvesting system, and now the villagers from around the region come to the school to get clean water. So it's not just about the education, it's about the communities that we serve and how we build them up. We are also committed to serving humanity by reaching out to children of any tribe, religion, or ethnic group. We're creating self-sustaining schools by empowering African communities. You know, some of the other stories related to our values. You know, there's a book out called Toxic Charity, and if you have a moment, you should check the book out. It speaks rather directly to one of our core values, and that is that we create self-sustaining schools. You know, it's so important that we don't go in and destroy the fabric of the local community, but rather work with them to develop their community. Well, that self-sustaining goal is so important to us that we make sure that we're working with the local community, whether it be engineers, architects, artisans, painters, laborers, even the teachers. What we do is we form a local committee based on the local knowledge and ability of that particular village, and they oversee the school. It's their school. You know, one of the times that I traveled to one of our schools as we arrived, they were giving us a tour. And finally, I asked the tour guide, "Do you know who we are?" And he said, "No, absolutely not. I just was told that some Mzungus, that means white men, were coming, and so I was to give you a tour." He didn't even know that we were those organizing committee members who had organized the funding, the construction project, and sent the funds overseas. Rather, they completely own their project. It's their school. And so he was proudly showing us their school. And that's really an important goal of ours. And finally, we maintain a volunteer-based organization to ensure that 95% of all donated funds go directly to our projects. Now, with that vision, the Saint Nektarios Education Fund has come up with 5 pillars that we believe are essential to a child's development. Of course, we build facilities, classrooms. These are the physical buildings, the most basic but essential elements to education. But that's not enough. In each of our schools, we've committed ourselves to clean water and power. We're putting in wells, rain filtration, and power sources like solar panels. This gives on-site access to water and power, and it increases students' health and their performance. Additionally, in each of our schools, we are putting in sanitation, waste facilities to prevent contamination. I don't know if you know this, but sanitation is the silent but essential element in education. All of this helps us with disease prevention. We've initiated hand-washing initiatives and hygiene education because a healthy student is in the classroom. You may not know this as well, but GI disease is the #1 cause of classroom absence in sub-Saharan Africa. Finally, as I mentioned in our values, we work on sustainability. It's a pillar of ours. We look to establish local revenue streams and community involvement. Saint Nektarios Education Fund schools are community-run, community-driven, and community-supported. These schools are not ours, but theirs. Well, it's probably time to show you some of these schools and talk a little bit about them. I mentioned to you earlier in the presentation that we began by offering scholarships and eventually microgrants, but in 2007, we began with this very ambitious project of building our own standalone school. To date, we've constructed 5 of these, and I'd like to show you them. The first of them is the Saint Nektarios Academy in Sarum, Kenya. It was built in 2007. It has capacity for 240 students and it includes a playground. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that when we put in a school, that often generates additional development. And in some of the pictures of our St. Nicholas School, you can see a clinic nearby. That's not a clinic we built, but rather was built by another NGO. And so, as I said, building a school becomes a community driver. Our second project was built in Gulu, Uganda. It was part of a larger project in which we established 2 new schools within one campus. The first of them was constructed in May of 2010. It's entitled the Archangel Michael Middle School. It was completed within a year. It was our second school project, and we expanded our vision. To the school, we added administration offices, additional land, the water project, latrines, equipment and furniture for the school. This campus, as we envisioned it, would host 300 students on an annual basis. After we completed our second school, the Archangel Michael Middle School in Gulu, Uganda, we noticed something through our research, and that is that most of the schools in sub-Saharan Africa are grade schools. There's not a lot of opportunity for the upper level education, especially in the sciences, math, in what we call STEM subjects. And so our second project, the Archangel Michael Middle School, we felt wouldn't be complete until we added a high school to it. So on that campus, in February of 2011, we completed our third school, the Archangel Michael High School in Gulu, Uganda. This third project increased our capacity on that campus by an additional 260 students. We put into it additional administration offices. We added additional land, more water and water storage, latrines, a solar electric system, and a science lab. It's important to us that our schools are sustainable, that they have a long-term impact on the communities we serve. And so the Archangel Michael campus additions, which were completed in November of 2013, ensured that this school would, for many years to come, provide a life-changing education. And so we added to that campus dormitories, shower facilities, a kitchen, additional land once again, so they'd have a sports field, fencing and security. We remodeled some of the buildings that we first constructed, and we added not only additional water storage, but food storage as well on the campus. Our fourth school in Lawiminiaga, Uganda, has a special story attached to it. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how this school came about. You know, one day in passing, a very generous man came up and placed a check in my pocket. I went home that evening after a long day and had forgotten all about it. In fact, had tossed my shirt in the laundry. Well, I rushed to retrieve that shirt before it made it into the wash because I thought, oh yeah, there's a check in my pocket, thinking maybe a $100, $200 donation had just been made to the Saint Nektarios Education Fund. When I opened the check, I noticed it was for $80,000. I quickly got on the phone and called the donor and said, what do you want me to do? And he said, whatever the fund needs, it doesn't matter to me. Well, in time, that $80,000 donation went to fund this fourth project. When we got to the opening of this new school in Lawiminiaga, not only was it in a remote area, but we had done things that we had never attempted before in any of our projects. We had added things like internal wiring so that the solar electric system would work in all of the classrooms. We had added double pane windows and handicap ramps. But the whole village came out to see the opening of this school, and I remember even teaching a young boy who had never used a door with a door handle how to open a door. I mean, it's truly amazing where these schools are going and the changes that they're making. We told the story about how the donations had come to the local village, and then soon they were all chattering in their local dialect. Of course, those of us who were there from America didn't know what they were saying. And I told the story about this man who had given a donation. Well, what I haven't told you yet is that shortly after that donation, that man's son had died of oral cancer. As I told the story to the villagers and as they began to chat, they soon turned to us and through the interpreter said, we want to name this high school after that donor's son. And so today, the Trenton White Memorial High School stands as a testament not only to this young man's life, but also to the father who lost his son, but now provides to these new sons and daughters an opportunity for a life-changing education. Our most recent project is entitled the St. Sophia High School. It's located in Butembe, Uganda. A few moments ago I mentioned how we put in water systems, and this school is constructed by Lake Victoria. I remember driving out there with members of our board. We took a 4x4 and we made our way out of the capital of Kampala and through the jungle, and boy, it's hard to see that these roads are even roads, but they are for them. As we came down into this valley, you could see Lake Victoria, and it was beautiful. And I remember on the sides of the roads, we would see the villagers drying small fish that they were using for meal that they would feed to their livestock. As we got into a valley, it was such a remote area, I thought, boy, how and why would we build a school out here? And as we got out of the van, there were all these students. They were jumping around us. They were shouting and singing. It was quite a joyous event. And I remember noticing that out in the middle of the field there was a pile of bricks. We started talking to the elders and we said, you know, what's this pile of bricks? And they said, well, the truth is, we heard you were coming, we've made these bricks by hand, and we wanted to commit that if you'll build a school here, we'll take care of it. Well, I started talking to some of the elders and I said, well, we need some land, because one of the things that we do is, as I said in our values, is we incorporate the local community. And so there was a local Muslim man there who was taking the tour with us, and he said, how much land do you need, through the interpreter? And I said, oh, I don't know, how much do you have? And he pointed off into the distance in one direction and the other, and he says, as far as you can see, I own all this land. And he said, how much do you need? And I said, well, could we start with 10 acres? And he said, sure, it's yours, as long as you'll build a school. Well, we continued our tour, and one of the things that I remember, we walked into their classroom that they were using. It was a dilapidated building. It's something we'd probably call a shack, and we'd have a hard time storing garden tools in it. This shack had a dirt floor, it had exposed rafters, it was open to the elements, crumbling bricks, and there were probably over 200 students seated. As we were giving a presentation to the village and as the local elders were also giving presentations to us, I remember looking into the crowd of students, and there was one young girl who was fixed on us, staring at us intently. And there was just one teacher who was overseeing this entire classroom. Well, today we completed, in October of 2015, a brand new state-of-the-art school for them. It has enough capacity for 240 students. We've added all those things that we've talked about earlier. But one of the things that we're excited about is that this school is another opportunity for us to provide a life-changing education for that one girl who was sitting in that classroom that day looking at us. You know, one of the special stories about this fifth school that I love to tell, you know, we arrived on this location to scout it out. We weren't sure we were going to build a school there, and sometimes we're wondering, you know, who's directing this whole project anyway? Is it us? Is it God? And as we were doing our tour, there was a little boy I kept noticing off to the side. He was kind of following us around, and finally I asked one of the elders. There was a priest who's this was the village he served. I said, who's that boy? And he said, oh, that's my son. His name is Nektarios. And I kind of smiled at him and I said, do you know the name of the fund that we operate? And he said, no. Once again, this was another village where they were told simply to give these Mzungus a tour. And he said, oh, what is it? And I said, well, the name of the fund is the Saint Nektarios Education Fund. You know, as I wind down our presentation, I always like to take a moment and talk about what's next. You know, you might be wondering how much money has gone into these schools, and I think you're going to be shocked. For all 5 schools, we spent just under $700,000. Think about that. Think how powerful your donation is and how much it changes the lives of children. You know, we're hoping that in hearing this presentation, you'll get involved. There's so many ways that you can get involved. You know, one of the things that you can do for us is simply tell others about our work. You can point them to our website, snef.org, or StNektariosEducationFund.org. You can host a party. You can share this presentation with others. But you know, here in America, our most important asset is you. You're the one who drives the Saint Nektarios Education Fund, and you're the one who makes possible the life-changing education that we provide. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll support us. God bless and good night.